The myth of the Norsemen. The apples of Iduna. The apples of Iduna is a myth of the Norsemen or Vikings. They were the Danes, Norwegians, and Swedes who raided most of North and West Europe from the sea during the 8th to the 11th century. They often settled in the lands they had conquered. As the great glaciers withdrew at the close of the last mighty ice age, Northern Europe was a fearsome, awesome place. Only the gods were young and beautiful, and the hope for the world. The jealous, evil frost giants lived in Jotunheim, ever ready to attack the gods at the slightest sign of weakness. Beneath the earth labored the ugly dwarves and trolls and gnomes, collecting gold and silver and jewels. They were clever smiths and forged beautiful metal work and fine swords. But they crawled like maggots beneath the surface of the world and forever envied the loveliness of the Aesir, as the gods were called. The Aesir looked at the chaos around them and created Midgard, a garden in the middle of the earth. One day, Odin, the son of Thor, with Hornir, the bright one, and Loki, the fascinating, unreliable good friend and deceiver, were strolling through Midgard when they saw two trees, the ash and the elm. From each tree was carved a log in human form. Odin gave the logs souls, Hornir gave them the power of movement and the gifts of hearing, seeing, and feeling, while Loki gave them blood and the bloom of life. So man and woman were created and populated the earth. Then the Aesir sought to make a home for themselves. They crossed the wide river Ifing, whose waters never froze, and ventured to the broad plain Idawod, set high above Midgard. In the center of this lovely and sacred place, they built Asgard, the home of the gods. In this beautiful city, there was to be neither quarreling nor bloodshed, but harmony for as long as the gods should rule. Iduna lived in Asgard. She was the wife of Bragi, the god of poetry, and she was the keeper of the apples of youth. The gods of Asgard did not stay young naturally. They could age as mortals did. However, if now and then at their feasting they ate an apple from Iduna's magic casket, they stayed vigorous and young through the ages. The frost giants and the dwarves longed to eat the apples of youth, but Iduna never left Asgard, and the apples stayed safe in their magic casket. As Iduna took an apple from the casket and gave it to a god, another apple would appear magically to take its place. The beautiful Aesir seemed to secure in their eternal youth. One day Odin, Honir, and the tricky, unreliable Loki set out on a journey through Midgard, as they often did. They walked for many hours, surveying the progress of the men and women they had created. As evening approached, the weary, hungry gods slew an ox and, building a fire, set the ox to roast. After a rest, Odin reached for the meat, expecting it to be cooked and sizzling with running fat. To his disgust, it was still raw. Stirring and feeding the fire, the three gods waited again. sure that this time the meat would be ready to eat. They once more leaned forward over the blazing fire and attempted to slice some tasty roast ox to put into their empty stomachs. The meat was still as raw as if it had never seen a flame. It was now clear to all three of them that magic was at work. Looking round, they saw an eagle perched in a tree above them. At once the eagle spoke and admitted that he was the cause of the trouble. "But if you will share your meal with me, I will cease my mischief, and the ox will soon be roasted," he screeched. As the ox was a large one, Odin, Hornir, and Loki agreed to the eagle's terms, thinking there was plenty for all to eat. Then the flames of the fire leapt high, and in a few seconds the meat was roasted. Odin cut the carcass into succulent pieces, and the gods were about to eat, when, to their indignation, the eagle swooped from the tree, snatched up nearly all the meat, and left but a few miserable scraps for the three ravenous travelers. Flying into a rage, Loki snatched up a stick and tried to beat the eagle away from the food. But the eagle was the mountain giant, Thiassi, endowed with magic powers. The stick struck fast to the back of the eagle and to the hands of Loki. The eagle soared away into the air, and the helpless god was dragged through the sky with his feet crashing against the tops of the trees, and his arms felt as if they were being dragged from their sockets. "Release me!" begged Loki. "Not until you promise to do me a favor," screeched Thiassi, swooping through the air and blundering through the trees to increase the suffering of the unfortunate Loki. Then Thiassi went on, "When I release you, say nothing of what has happened to the other gods. But when you return to Asgard, lure Iduna out to walk in Midgard, that I may obtain possession of her and the casket of the apples of youth." Loki was horrified, but in such pain that he swore a solemn oath to do as Thiassi demanded. Then he was released and walked back through the forest to rejoin Odin and Hornir. But he told them nothing of his promise, and they were amazed that he had escaped from the eagle so easily. After a few days, the three gods completed their journey and returned to Asgard. It so happened that at that time Iduna's husband, Bragi, was away from Asgard on a minstrel journey, playing and singing his poetry to all who would listen, leaving Iduna alone. The cunning and frightened Loki went to see her and asked if she would give him one of her apples. Smiling, Iduna opened the magic casket and, taking an apple, handed it to Loki. At once another apple appeared in the casket. The stalk seemed as secure as ever. Then Iduna became puzzled. Instead of eating the apple, Loki looked at it and turned it over and held it up to the light. "Is something wrong?" asked Iduna. "No," replied cunning Loki. "But I am amazed. I thought there were no other apples like these, yet only this morning I saw some growing away from Asgard, down in the land of men." At first Iduna laughed and would not believe him, but Loki was so insistent that the apples he had seen were exactly the same as Iduna's that she agreed to go with him to look, taking her casket of apples with her so that she might compare them with the ones which Loki spoke. Iduna went with Loki from the protection of Asgard. Further and further he led her from the abode of the Aesir. Then suddenly he hid, and Iduna was alone. At last she realized she had been tricked and turned to run back to Asgard, but she was too late. The giant Thiassi, still wearing his eagle wing, swept down from the sky and, seizing her in his talons, carried Iduna and the casket of apples to his home in the mountains. Loki slunk back to Asgard and said nothing of what had happened. At first, Iduna was not missed. It was thought that she was with her husband Bragi, singing in a far grove, where they would trouble no one. Gradually the effect of the apples began to wear off. Lines and white hair appeared to mar the beauty of the Aesir. They fell sick and ached with the pains of age. They searched for Iduna throughout Asgard, but they could not find her. They questioned each other and found that Iduna had been last seen in the company of Loki. Odin sent for Loki, who stood in fear before him and confessed how he betrayed Iduna to Thiassi. The whole of the Aesir fell into a fury and threatened Loki with instant death if he did not rescue Iduna and regain the apples of youth. By this time, with the grey hand of old age upon him, Loki knew he must overcome his fear and turn against Thiassi. He begged the goddess Freya to lend him her falcon disguise. Dressed as a falcon, I shall not be recognized by Thiassi, and I shall the more easily rescue Iduna, pleaded Loki. So Freya lent Loki her falcon feathers, and he flew to the mountain home of the giants. Fortunately, Thiassi was away fishing in the north, and Iduna was sitting alone with the casket of apples at her side. Loki circled around the lonely, sad goddess and transformed her and the casket into a small nut. Seizing this in his claws, he turned and raced for the walls of Asgard in safety. He was not to succeed so easily. Thiassi returned in time to see the falcon fleeing towards the horizon. Recognizing the falcon's feathers as the disguise of the gods, he swiftly pulled on his own eagle's wings and flew in pursuit. The mighty eagle easily gained on the smaller falcon, and Loki, weakened by old age, had to strain every muscle and summon up all his resolution to keep ahead. At last he flapped exhausted over the walls of Asgard and fell to the ground. Meanwhile, the anxious gods had lined the walls of their lovely city, staring intently into the sky for Loki's return. Seeing the eagle pursuing him, they piled wood shavings onto the ramparts. As soon as Loki had swept over into safety, the Aesir set fire to the wood, and Thiassi was caught in flames and the smoke. Choking and blinded, he fell to the ground inside Asgard and was swiftly killed by the vengeful gods. Loki and Iduna recovered their true shape, and once more the gods were able to eat the apples of youth. How sweet they tasted, and how happy the gods were to see their wrinkles and gray hair disappear, and their youth and loveliness return. It is no wonder that the giants try such tricks to obtain the apples for themselves, said Odin. He ordered that the eyes of the slain Thiassi should be taken up to heaven and turned into shimmering stars. In that way, the giant continued to live, and the honor done to his eyes softened the anger of his brothers at his